Hello, everyone. We're here again today with another feature in our series on Arlington's internationally acclaimed composer, Alan Hovhaness. Today we'll be focusing on Alan's personal life, especially with his wife, Hinako Fujihara Hovhaness, who's just finished a book on his life. We have with us today Bill and Coleen Holst, who have a lot of stories to share about Alan and his wife. Bill, Coleen, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Bill Holst. This is my wife, Coleen. I am the son of Hinako Fujihara Hovhaness and the stepson of Alan Hovhaness. I think we'd like to kind of talk about how we first were introduced to Alan, and how he gradually we gained knowledge of what he represented and his impact on our lives and our children's lives. So my mother in the mid 60s to early 70s was a singer in local churches, and she also was in the chorus of Seattle Opera. And she had friends that would come over occasionally from the music world or her singing teachers. But in the summer of 1973, she invited a composer, Alan Hovhaness, to our house. Of course, I was only 13, and the only thing that really meant anything to me was baseball, so it didn't mean anything to me. But anyway, when Alan showed up, there was a tall gentleman in a suit, and he was very quiet, polite, and pretty much an intellectual. So we had dinner at our house, and had conversation afterwards. But what I didn't realize is this man would eventually have a great impact on my life. And so anyway, during my high school years, my mother and Alan lived at a different location. I stayed with my father, and occasionally we would visit them. Of course, they were very busy in that time. When you read the book, there's a lot of concerts and a lot of travel. So we didn't see them a lot. Occasionally we'd go over and visit them. Of course, my sister has this famous story about she'd spent the night at their place and heard drums at night, all night. She was terrorized by these drums, but no one else had heard them. So we started understanding Alan's connection with the spiritual world. About the time that after I graduated, I had moved out with a couple of friends, and that ended up miserable. And I ended up moving in with my mother and Alan. Alan and I became very, very good friends. He had a lot of trust in me. At one point, he actually wanted to adopt me, but I had to reject that because I was very close to my father, and I think Alan actually respected me more for not being adopted because he realized that my dedication to my father. Of course, my mother and Alan had their fights, and I remember on one occasion I was kind of the referee between one fight. They were arguing between each other, and my mother stated that she is going to leave Alan and become a nun. And then Alan said that he was going to become a Buddhist monk, and he walked out the door, probably heading for the Far East. But anyway, along the night, I had to go out and drive through the neighborhood searching for Alan, and eventually I was able to locate Alan and convince him to come back home. And the next morning, everything was forgotten. So my mother and Alan, their schedule was very much kind of the nighttime. Alan did a lot of composing, after midnight, and so he'd stay up till 4 o'clock doing composing. So their schedule was very much skewed towards the later part. So they would get up, noonish. Of course, they had to have their breakfast and do all their business before they went out into the world. And so I recall their breakfasts were pretty standard. They were always the same. First thing, Alan would sit down and have a glass of orange juice, and then a bowl of like grapefruit or oranges, and then of course scrambled eggs and toast and a cup of coffee. And of course they would take a couple hours for that breakfast to do its work. And then once they were all finished with their business, and they would go out and barely make it to the post office by 4 in the afternoon. Alan and I can remember having several conversations with him while my mother was preparing dinner. And so we would sit there and talk, and Alan would talk a lot about his earlier stories when he was younger. He had several friends, and we would talk about that. And then during dinner, of course, my mother would join in. And after dinner, my mother would do the dishes, and Alan and I would sneak off to the living room, and he would play a concert while I rested on the couch. And then once my mother was finished with the dishes, she would come in, we'd have a cup of tea, and then Alan would start in again. And he loved talking about Schubert, Sibelius, Beethoven, Mozart, but it wasn't necessarily about their music, it was about their personal sides. He knew very much about them, and so we'd have discussions about that. And Alan would talk throughout the night.
Yeah, and so when I first met Alan, it was a phone call. I was calling Bill at the house to talk to him, and when Alan picked up the phone, he said, "Is this?" And it was another girl's name, and I said, "No, this is Coleen." And he hesitantly, kind of backed off on talking, and I think he knew that he said the wrong thing, another girl's name.
Yeah.
And then I said, "Yeah, just let him know that I called," and that was the first acquaintance with Alan. And then the second time was that we were coming to the house in our car, and they were leaving in their car, and they rolled down the window and said, "Good luck." And we looked at them and said, "What does that mean? Why are they saying good luck?" And so anyway, we went, and the third time was actually about a year later. They were doing a special on Alan on Channel 9, and it happened to be our wedding was coming up, and Alan wrote the music for our wedding and wrote song for Hinako, and they both, he played the organ and she sang at the wedding. And then we found out later that Channel 9 hired someone that did a fraudulent resume, and he didn't know anything about photography or anything like that. And he was just all over the place. So they didn't, capture the whole wedding scene on that one. But anyway, and then in 1984, we had our first child, and we were trying to figure out who was going to babysit Xena. And we ended up having Alan and Hinako babysit the baby. And that was a good experience for them because they didn't have any children together or anything like that. And they really enjoyed taking care of the first grandchild. That really made them really happy. So he was always a family man to me. I didn't see him really as a composer, more of a family man and a grandfather, father type. So he also believed in education, and we had the first 3 children, and there was a library nearby. It was probably about 2 blocks away. They would take them there on the weekends, and they would also teach them poetry. And they had a lot of good times together going there and learning how to write poetry with Alan and Hinako. And they really believed in education, not necessarily chores, but more education was more important to Alan. And then we went on lots of trips. We went on to Mount Si here in Washington, Snoqualmie Falls together. And we also went to Whistler in Vancouver. It took about 2 hours to get there. And we also, actually, that was the big adventure. We went to a restaurant the first day we arrived in Whistler, and they sat us down next to a gorilla, and Hinako did not like that. She said there was body parts showing on the gorilla. "You need to move that gorilla away from me or I can't eat." And so they picked it up and moved it out of the way. The gorilla's name was Harold. And then after that, we went up a flight of like 8 stairs and to go to the hotel room afterwards. And we had Bill's grandmother with us, and she grabbed onto Hinako when we got to the top of the steps, and she pulled Hinako all the way down to the bottom of the steps. They went tumbling down. And they didn't get hurt, we luckily. And then that night when we were in the hotel, all the fire alarms went off at like 2 o'clock in the morning. We had to stand outside because we could smell smoke and everything in the hotel room. But we had a hard time getting them out of their rooms. It took about 10 minutes. We were like nervous that they were going to burn, alive because we smelled smoke. But we got outside and we were fine. Went back to the hotel, and then the next morning we went to a hall where we ate breakfast and stuff like that. And one side was a bunch of construction people, and the other side was, we were coming in to put our plates on the table. And they were saying some things that Alan didn't like. They were whistling at us and stuff like that. And Alan raised his cane and said, "I shake my spear in ignorance at you." We had to say, "Alan, please sit down. Don't say anything else. We don't want to cause any problems." So we sat down, and that was the end of that. And we said that was the curse of Harold. That's what we thought it was, the curse of Harold, because we had to move the gorilla out of the way,
Right.
and that was our experience at Whistler. Our fourth child was coming, and Hinako wanted Alan to touch my stomach while the baby was moving. And he said, "No, that's not my place. I can't do that. No. And so we decided that since it was our fourth child, we would invite Alan and Hinako to the birthing room. And of course, in his days, that wasn't allowed. Fathers weren't allowed into the birthing room. And he came into the room and he said, "No, this is not my place. I cannot be here." So we sent him out with the other 3 children to babysit, and the kids knew that something big was happening. I had Zena was 9 and William was 6 and Gregory was 3. And I guess they were jumping off the furniture, jumping up and down and jumping off the furniture in the waiting room. Alan didn't know how to control them. So he composed a song called "Baby Jumping Up and Down." And while the kids were done, he said Gregory's trying to suicide himself. That's what he said when he got out. He goes, "Gregory's trying to suicide himself," while he was that, and that was the excitement of the birthing of Tracy, my fourth child. We also had a lot of, good times together. We heard a lot of stories, like Bill said, about Sibelius and also the painter, where he said Leonardo da Vinci, he said he was reincarnated from the time of Leonardo da Vinci, and he was a friend of Leonardo da Vinci, and he named a person's name. And we looked it up, and it was a musician.
Yeah.
And he said he was that musician. And we also heard Hinako talk about, she was the Mona Lisa. She could see Alan as another person, but it was Alan. She saw a face of another person, and she would talk about that, that they were meant to be together because they lived in a different time together. And so, yeah, we had a lot of fun times together. We, enjoyed Alan. He was the family man to us. And we really miss them a lot. We wish that they were here, and I'm sure they are. They're watching over us, and we love them. So, yeah.
I love there's a thread in the conversation about how in so many circumstances, his response would be to write a piece of music.
Right.
There was a birthday or, kids having fun or whatever. But, the response is, I can write a song about that.
Right. And the kids enjoyed every holiday. They would come over and they would, Alan would get on the piano and Hinako would turn the pages and they would play music, after our dinner and stuff like that. And every dinner that she made, which was, she made this Japanese dish that was called sukiyaki. And it was a thinly sliced beef with vegetables cooked on with fish broth. And it was on top of rice. But she would take pictures of the whole dinner. Every dinner she would make, she would take pictures of it before anybody could eat. So she'd put it all on the table, take pictures, and then she would, we'd have pictures of all the different dinners. But stroganoff and Japanese sukiyaki was one of the main dishes that they really loved to eat when we were over at the house.
You mentioned, Bill, when you were young, after dinner, he'd talk about his, his past and some of his experiences. I'm fishing here, but did he talk about his life in Arlington, growing up in Arlington at all?
He did. So he used to talk about when he was real young that in the summertime, so there was I think when he visited his uncle, there was, this probably was in New Hampshire though, but he would go blackberry picking and they would climb mountains with his uncle and they would find a spot and he would do artwork with his uncle. There's actually a couple of pieces of art that Alan has that kind of shows, when he was, 10 or so of his artwork of the hills there. His parents didn't like him venturing off into the mountains. So, after they went blueberry picking,
Yeah.
then Alan would venture off into the mountains and his parents, tried to persuade him not to do that because they didn't want him to get lost. But in the book, it tells, a lot of stories of his neighborhood and a few experiences of, his childhood activities.
I can't wait to read that because, of course, I know his neighborhood pretty well, being right here.
Oh.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, he clearly had a special relationship with mountains, so I think it'd be difficult to keep him away from the mountains. Right.
Yep.
So, what more can you tell us about the book? When's it coming out, and what's the name of it?
So the name of the book is Alan Hovhaness, Unveiling One of the Great Composers of the 20th Century. And the inspiration behind that, I guess I could talk a little bit about my mother and Alan's relationship.
Sure.
and how that gradually became how the book was written.
Mm-hmm.
To understand it, I'll give a kind of a quick summary background of Alan. So in 1942, he had actually earned a scholarship to Tanglewood, and he was criticized by Aaron Copland for producing ghetto music. Of course, Alan did not follow the trends. He basically created his music that he thought should be produced, and it was based off harmony and melody, and he tried to create beautiful and healing music, which at the time was against kind of the trend.
Mm-hmm.
So after he was criticized, he left Tanglewood and he destroyed over 1,000 of his pieces. And after that, he had a very close Greek psychic friend who urged him to study his background, Armenian background, and try and incorporate some of those techniques into his composing. So there was a period there, in the 40s through 50s where he was pretty much Armenian associated type music.
Mm-hmm.
He eventually went off to visit India, Japan, and Korea, and he studied their ancient, not only their cultures, but their music techniques. So, he kind of went off the grid and studied the old ancient methods, and he incorporated that into his music. So my mother understood, that mystical world. So Alan always thought, he heard music in his head, and he always carried a piece of paper and pen and was always writing music. But he thought everyone else heard music in his head. But I think, knowing Alan, I think he was just, I kind of see him as a conduit to another dimension or an interpreter of nature. He could capture what trees or mountains are saying to us and capture that into his music. And so, Alan was very much in the same frequency or in tune with nature and the mystical spiritual world. So my mother understood that very much, and she tried to, carry on his legacy. So my mother, after meeting Alan, Alan's composing actually went a little bit higher because he composed a lot of music for my mother. She was a soprano. And so there was a period there where she did, did several symphonies for her specifically. But at some point she realized that, do I need to further my career, or do I need to carry and solidify Alan's legacy? And she gave up her career as a singer and focused on Alan. And Alan wasn't perfect, and the book kind of states that in there. It's that he's not perfect. He was a intellect. He was a fantastic composer and musician. But for instance, if you said, "Hey, Alan, where's the house keys?" or "Alan, it's your turn to make dinner tonight," those would be failures. But that's kind of where their relationship really worked together. Is that my mother was able to carry on the tasks that Alan couldn't, and so they worked together as a team to create this great music team. Yeah. She did most of the management and the promotions, and talked to all did the recordings. So that's how they kind of melded together. So as far as the book goes, my mother understood that Alan's personal side had to be portrayed to the world. I mean, everyone knew him as a composer. They knew his compositions, but they didn't necessarily know his personality and behind the scenes. So, there are other composers that, there are stories about their backgrounds, but my mother wanted to make it personal, firsthand, stories that came from, actually living those stories. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what's portrayed in there is more of the personal side of Alan. Of course, there's a lot of documentation of important dates and, behind the scenes of classical music, gossip is in there also. But that's really what you wanted to do is make it so the world understood the personal side of the composer as opposed to just knowing his music.
Yeah, I know with most genius composers, you can speculate a lot about who they were as people through their music. But I think it's much more valuable if you learn more about the composer as a person, and it helps you appreciate the music and understand the music better. And that some of his music it's so expansive that it can be challenging to understand. There's so much in there that knowing more about Alan the person will really help, I think, us appreciate the music even more, which I think is a very valuable contribution.
Right. I always think of his music as the final product, which is just the tip of the iceberg of Alan Hovhaness, the person. There are so many different stories. I mean, he did a lot of travel. He knows a lot about different cultures, and there's so many different avenues that Alan knew about. Like I say, I think the music is just the final product of that.
Yeah. Now, tomorrow is a special day. I believe the 25th anniversary of Alan passing. Can you talk a little bit? What were the final years of his life like? Was he continue to be productive, or there unfinished things that were driving him nuts? Or
so Alan passed away in 2000, and I think his last composition was in about 1997.
Okay.
So I would say his final 5 years, he wasn't as productive, from 1995 to 1997. He did, compose some, but he wasn't as productive as he was previously. But I think the majority of his, final years were family oriented. Mm-hmm. The book captures that. There are different phases of the book. The last part, of course, is about, the last 5 years or so of Alan's life. But, again, this was teamwork with my mother and Alan. My mother did everything she could in order to keep Alan alive. Gerard Schwartz, he actually helped out quite a bit. He found a doctor who very much helped Alan for the last 3 years. You know, so my mother wanted to keep him alive. She was a very small woman. She was able to make inventions to help Alan, move him, different inventions for, preparing and caring for him. But Alan also, he was also helping because he knew how much my mother needed him. And so he did all he could in order to remain alive for that period. But again, those last, 3 years definitely were very much family oriented.
Do you think his
And
sense
you
of
would come out and fly out. We lived in a different state. He would come out and help wash Alan like once a month or something,
Yeah.
for her, because she was only like 90 pounds or maybe even less than that at that time. And it was very difficult for her to carry a, large man and give him a bath. So Bill came out and helped her quite a bit.
do you think during his last years that his spirituality or philosophical nature developed further?
I can't say, so Alan was so involved with the mystical spiritual world before. I don't think it gained any, but he always had that that aura around him. Like I say, especially after midnight, Alan became a different person. Very much talkative, and that's kind of where most of the mystical spiritual stuff came out during that time.
What are your thoughts about his fame today? Maybe I'm biased, but it seems to me that his understanding of his work and his music is growing. It certainly is around here, and I think it's his incorporation of a lot of international music and customs and methods. I think was very challenging to musicians and audiences in previous generations, but now I think the generations are much more accepting. Much more called fusion, much more accepting of broadly based music. Do you get the sense that there's a broader understanding and acceptance of his music today than there has been in the past?
So I'm definitely not a music expert, but I agree. There's tendencies in music. I think when he was criticized back in the 40s, I think the general listeners have kind of gone away from that. And since Alan, it was not that. He was more of, harmony and, people have a feel for that more. So I do feel that his music is coming back. And that's one thing I didn't realize is that, since taking over from my mother, is really how many people enjoy Alan. There was a period where my mother was sick, and so like a 5-year period where she wasn't able to promote actively, and so now I'm trying to make contacts with people. But it's amazing how many people remember him and realize what his music, and I've had nothing but positive. Everyone I've talked to so far, it's been very, very positive about his music.
Yeah, you haven't run into any Coplands or Bernsteins who think it's not what it is. I think they lacked imagination. So, are there guests joining us?
We've invited a few guests to maybe give a memory of Alan.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Sahan. It's Alan.
Sahan, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I met him in 1969, and that year was the centennial of the great Armenian composer Komidas, who had established contemporary Armenian music. And a bunch of culturally oriented people decided to celebrate Komidas's centennial by releasing 2 LPs. And I was the organizer, so to speak, and I chose the very well-known Armenian composers to participate in interpreting Komidas's music. And Alan Hovhaness was one of them, and he was supposed to conduct Komidas's choral works. And this all happened at Maro Jemian's house, who had performed, who had premiered Alan's Lusadzak in the 40s at Town Hall. So it was a very friendly atmosphere, and we got to know each other, discussed what we were supposed to do, what he was supposed to conduct. It was I remember, 30-piece choir, a very good choir. And our work together at that time, in '69, became very important to both of us. Why? Alan, when he was 8, 9 years old, his father, Alan's father, had some recordings of Gomidas singing. And Gomidas had made the recordings. There were 2 recordings, one in 1908, made in Paris, and then a second one made in 1912 in Constantinople.
Sahan, let me stop you. Can you put your camera on? I think people would like to see you.
Is it not?
It's
on?
not, just your name.
Oh.
There we go. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Sorry about that. Keep going.
Okay. Anyway, so he listened to Gomidas's pieces constantly. And Gomidas, the Armenian music, the essence of Armenian music, became part of Alan's musical personality, essence. I was familiar with Gomidas's music because when Gomidas had moved to Constantinople in 1910, he had formed a choir of 300 people. That choir still exists in Istanbul to this day. And when I was 19 years old, they asked me if I would accompany the choir every Sunday when they were singing Gomidas's Divine Liturgy with the organ. So for about 2 years, I played Gomidas's music, and I became very familiar with his spirit, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, was Alan Hovhaness, was Hovhaness involved in that?
No, not at that time. He had nothing
Okay.
to do. But I was familiar with Gomidas from Istanbul, and Alan was familiar because of the recordings that his father played for him when he was a child. So the two of us got together, and we both understood in our essence, musical essence, Gomidas's musical personality.
Oh, great.
So,
Do we have some other people in the waiting room to share some stories?
I'm here, Marvin Rosen.
Hello. Yeah, I would like all of you to tell a story.
I'm here. I have some note ready to go. Here I go. I met Alan Hovhaness for the first time on January 17th, 1980 in Alice Tully Hall, New York, right after the premiere of the 34th Symphony for bass trombone and strings. At this time, he signed my copy of his Madras Sonata. After this 1-minute meeting, I decided that I wanted to meet him a bit more formally. Well, I wrote to him and received, believe it or not, a handwritten reply in only 10 days. This is pre-texting and email and all that, of course. Alan Hovhaness said in his letter that he would be happy to meet me in person. He ended up coming to my Princeton home since he had to go to New York anyway. He came with his wife, Hinako, and his mother-in-law. During this visit, he played the Sonata Ananda Opus 303 from his manuscript on my piano. That was exciting. I also played several of his piano works for him, which was exciting also, of course. Alan Hovhaness was very appreciative and complimentary. I felt that I had known him for many years, even though I was a student and met him for 1 minute after the premiere in Alice Tully Hall. My friendship with the composer later became closer. We talked on the phone sometimes and got together when he was in the Northeast. The icing on the cake, though, was in the summer of 1985. This is when I met my wife-to-be, Beata, because of our common interest in his music. Yes, Beata and I got together thanks to the music that we both loved, the music of Alan Hovhaness. The piece that actually brought us together was the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. I had 2 copies of the old Columbia LP, and I brought one for her on our very first date. The recording was returned to me on the day we actually got married. What do you think of that? Yay! We later went to Seattle for me to play his music on his piano shortly before I recorded my first CD of his music, Fred the Cat, for Koch International. The memories of Alan Hovhaness will never be forgotten. He was a kind, wonderful human being who will always be in my memory and heart. It is hard to believe that it is 25 years since he passed away. His music deserves to live forever.
Well, did he know about you and your wife? And the
Oh, yeah.
Rubaiyat? Okay.
I'll throw something else. I wrote to him, asked him what music would be good for us to use on our wedding. And he answered me. We ended up using part of Avak the Healer. There was a processional. And we ended up using that. We played that. And we also had, when I was meeting with the getting married, it was in our house. We also played, I recall in the background, his harp concerto. And there was something else also, I believe. And I recall playing his music after our wedding. I recall playing some of it on our piano for the guests. So he was really well appreciated, even though he wasn't here in person.
Great. And
Hello.
who do we have now with another story?
Gail McEwen, and I can actually see both of their houses from my house, so that's how I met them. And one of Alan's goals was to encourage school districts to include a strings program. He was very pleased to hear that my school district had a 4th grade through 12th grade strings program. As a music teacher, I know the Puyallup High School Symphony performed Alan's symphonies in the 40 years that recently retired Todd Giltner was the symphony director, and he did talk to Hinako. Thanks to Alan and Hinako, they graciously gave me his recordings and his posters for me to teach the history and the music of Alan as a living composer at the time. At their local Safeway grocery store near us, Alan could be seen walking behind a grocery cart while handwriting new symphonies on his manuscript pad, which was resting on the handlebars while Hinako was filling the cart as she pulled it along. In a restaurant, Alan would quickly sit down at the table and compose while we filled our plates at the salad bar. After his salad plate was placed in front of him, he would graciously converse with us while enjoying his meal. On the way out of the restaurant, we did hear patrons excitedly exclaiming, "That's that composer." For dinner in his home, Alan put his whole attention on the meal and pleasantly conversed. While sitting on the piano bench before he played for us, he did tell us personal secrets he knew about fellow composers from his early days as a composer, and one of them was Bernstein. And one thing I really didn't put down, but at his 80th birthday celebration, my piano teacher's son, I also took lessons from Greg Short, he conducted it because Greg had just had a stroke. He was unable to play the piano while Alan directed, so Alan played. Well, of course, Alan was always thinking about the music ahead, never the music he had just written. And so it was in the middle of this, my piano teacher's son, who's a perfectionist, Dr. Short, stopped him and said, no, and then tells him where he needed to be in the music. And Alan quickly got to it and finished it. But that was just a side thing and fun. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I loved when you talked about the introduction from seeing a high school performance, because that was my first introduction to Alan Hovhaness when my high school performed one of his symphonies. It was so exciting. So who else do we have in the room? Alessandra, welcome back.
Hello, I'm Alessandra Pompili, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. And well, let's say, should I be here? Because I have never met Alan Hovhaness. So my memory of Alan is really a memory by proxy, in the sense that I met Alan Hovhaness via Martin Berkowski, who was one of his greatest advocates. And first, I would like to say something. I mean, what a coincidence. I don't know whether Alan would think of a coincidence, but tomorrow is this 25 years. Tomorrow is also the 21st of June, which in the world is World Music Day. So it's a day where internationally we do celebrate music. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And we are here celebrating also Alan Hovhaness. I wanted to then connect a moment with what William was talking about Alan being a sort of a conduit, if you want, being able to interpret the sound of nature and mountains. And I have here a memory that Martin Berkowski wrote about him. And he said, Alan seemed absolutely at peace with the universe. I learned from him that if one is to be an artist of any kind with something to say to the rest of the world, one first has to be at peace. And in fact, what Martin used to tell me was Alan never had a harsh word for anyone, a harsh word about anything at all. And when Marvin was talking about Alan being so appreciative, that is something that Martin also talked about. So he used to tell me that that he was recording a concert and Alan was there. And he said, well, I had so many questions for him. I wanted to ask him everything, advice about everything. I said, it's really very exciting. And he said, and Alan, instead of tearing me apart, he answered all of my questions clearly and thanked me sincerely for playing his music. So, and I'm also very happy to be here tonight, not only because since I've met Alan Hovhaness, I've been playing his music and he's fantastic. And he has some qualities that are unique. And one of these qualities is that he reaches immediately the listener. Mm. But also because I can remember Martin Berkowski. There was one big lesson that Martin had, well, among the many lessons. And once again, that referred to Alan Hovhaness. And he told me more than once that they would often walk around the city and said, I recall Alan looking up in the sky and saying every musician should study astronomy so that they would have humility. Looking at space and understanding what is your space into the universe. And that was an ethical lesson from Alan Hovhaness by Martin Berkowski.
Yeah, great. Do we have anyone else online? Sahan, so I'm sorry, I think I cut you off when other people were in. I can hear you.
Okay.
So I was wondering, I'm afraid I cut you off, and I apologize. So what do you have a personal story about Alan Hovhaness that explores him as a person?
Personal story that not that kind. I mean, he lived in Seattle and I lived in New York, so we didn't have that kind of a relationship, except that he admired my interpretation of his music, and I performed a great deal of his music, piano music. We recorded together on one piano, four hands actually, and before he died, he gave me about 30 or so manuscripts, which are not printed, they are not played, they are not recorded, and he asked me if I had the time and the opportunity, I would perhaps record them. I actually did record about 3-4 years ago, 9 of them. As I said, there are over 30. It's a huge amount of material. And I am interested primarily in his Armenian period, which is from 43 to 55. And that's why before I was talking about the Komidas, because Komidas is the one that ties Alan Hovhaness to me and me to Alan Hovhaness. He's a very important figure in both of our lives.
Well,
He was at times aloof, but in time we became quite affectionate towards each other, friendly, loving, and admiring to each other's work.
Oh, great. So who else has a good story?
Actually, Alan and Hinako were invited to play a piano that we were going to buy for our daughter because they wanted to teach Zena, our oldest, how to play piano. And Alan came and started playing the piano, but he ended up playing like a symphony of his on the piano. And the people behind him didn't know Alan, I don't think.
Was this in a show, like in a piano showroom?
We went to buy a piano. It was in a house.
Person's
Person's
house.
house. They were going to sell the piano, and we wanted them to test it out and make sure it sounded okay. And Alan sat down and started playing, and the people behind us, their mouth just dropped open, like, "What? That's our piano? Should we be selling it?"
Right.
And yeah, we thought that was kind of interesting because
they didn't know their piano could sound so good.
Yeah, and then we told them who it was, and so they knew, and and that was Zena's piano. When she started learning piano lessons from Alan and Hinako.
So I know you have his piano and the drawing and obviously a lot of his manuscripts. Do you have any other sort of interesting keepsakes that?
Oh, sure. So a lot of his stuff from beyond or earlier than the 1970s, probably got lost somewhere, but we do have some very old master recordings, studio recordings from the 1940s that were given to Alan, and we have several of those. And he has a bunch of bootleg concert reel-to-reel tapes, which I think are fairly valuable because probably no one else has copies of those historical concerts. So there's quite a few of those. He has some musical instruments, but yeah. So that's kind of, since my mother passed on, Coleen and I was a avionics systems engineer. I retired and decided to come. So we're living in my mother's house, and we're cataloging and archiving, all the items. And as we're going through there, we're, both my mother and Alan kept diaries. So we're finding out all these interesting stories and items about Alan that we didn't know about. So, there's a whole trove of valuable information that we've been going through.
Yeah, be sure to get a professional to digitize those old recordings, because the reel-to-reel recordings can fall apart if they're not, depending on the quality of the tape and how old they are. You mentioned instruments. Obviously, he played piano and organ. Was he proficient in other instruments?
Yeah, I think he's got Hichiriki. I don't know if you're familiar
No,
with
what's
that,
that?
but I think that's it's either Japanese or Korean
yeah.
type
Okay.
flute. But he used to play that on New Year's Eve. I guess that was the tradition, and it's a very high pitched like flute.
Mm-hmm.
He also has another, I'm not sure what, I think it's kind of a small guitar, or maybe it looks like it may be from India. It's definitely not a sitar, but it's a small instrument that looks like a guitar. Yes, is several other small instruments.
That's
And
cool.
lots of awards too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that we found the award cabinet, and it kind of reminds me of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they go and find the Lost Ark, and then at the very end, they take the Ark and they just put it in this warehouse along with all these other important discoveries. It's kind of the same thing with Alan's cabinet. Is there's just it's just full of all these awards, certificates, keys to cities. It just goes on and on. So it's really amazing how many awards he actually has. That
We never
just
knew.
put them on the shelf.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating conversation to find out more about Alan Hovhaness, the person, and again how that's affected it, how we can get to know him somewhat through the music, but hearing these personal stories about him, it helps us really appreciate the music more. So that's it's a wonderful experience. I think it's going to be a great historic recording for us. So Bill and Coleen, could you tell us again about the book, when it's coming out, where we'll be able to buy it? I believe you said they're taking pre-orders now?
Correct. So the official release of the book is October 28th of this year, 2025. We are going to have a book blessing in the Armenian bookstore down in Los Angeles on October 7th. And then I believe there in Arlington, we're going to have some kind of celebration there. We're trying to also work in a celebration at the Armenian Embassy in Washington, D.C. around that time. So the book, you can pre-order it. We've actually,
website,
we've looked at, it's on Amazon, it's on Thrift Books, Barnes and Noble. There is just the standard book. So I think that you can get that. And then there's also kind of the collector or custom book that collector's item that comes with a inside of a box. And then of course the cover of the book is leather. So, it's a step up for the special edition. So there are two separate editions you can purchase.
And that's available for pre-order also?
Yes, correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I hope it works out that you come to Arlington. I look forward to meeting you, and I guarantee we'll have a big celebration here, because we're doing everything we can to make everyone in Arlington aware of the importance of Alan Hovhaness and that how to celebrate his life. So
I wanted to ask something to William. Martin, you were mentioning earlier, Alan almost, I'm not sure I'm using the right words, but sort of almost living in his own, if you want, can I say, I wouldn't say a parallel universe, but no, being
Spiritual.
Yes. And Martin used to tell me that he lived very, very simply, that he seemed completely unmaterialistic. even in his, I don't know, in the environment where he lived. And don't want to abuse your time, but I wonder whether you could say something about it. No, even not writing on, let's say, on a small table or sort of not really paying so much attention to the material aspects of life.
Right. Yes. So Alan, yes, he was writing constantly. Whenever something came into his mind, he would have to jot it down because he would tell me that if he didn't write it down, then it would be lost forever. But yes, Alan was not tied to material objects in this world. You know, I had several conversations with him, and you know, he knew that he was going to pass at some time, and he always told my mother and I that he wants everyone at least the opportunity to hear his music. You know, they may like it, they may not, but at least give everyone an opportunity. So he, you know, definitely was not into material or making money off his music. The money that he made went back into promoting so that everyone can hear his music. Because basically his idea was to, you know, everyone to hear beautiful and healing music. And so, you know, my mother tried to carry on that tradition, and Hovhaness Fujihara Music Company, that's kind of our position, is that we're looking for zero net income. All the money that we get from purchases of music and royalties, we're trying to push back out there so that everyone can hear Alan's music. That's our goal, is to make the world aware of Alan and his great contribution.
It was clearly a.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It was clearly a huge gift to the world, and appreciate you all of you. The gift of music to the world is what can I say? It's critical. It's a wonderful thing. So. Again, I thank you all very much for taking the time out, and I'm glad we have this recording because it's a historical recording. Thank you all, and
Thank you.
happy International Music Day, and have a great weekend.
ACMI productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMI to learn how you can help.